Trevor didn't want to get a job when he got back from fighting overseas, so he started knocking off drug dealers. I decided to help him. I got caught up in the romantic adventure of it all. You'd stick a gun in a guy's face and you'd take him for everything he had on him. And these weren't just ordinary people either, like regular citizens. These were hard-living dope dealers. Men who were armed and dangerous. And we'd put one gun to the front of their face and one gun to the back of their head, and we'd say, "Empty out your pockets, motherfucker." And they'd do it. Because otherwise, we might well have blown their motherfucking brains out. The thing about that kind of lifestyle is that it's not just money and the quick thrill of adrenaline that comes with the potential for violence. It's also the drugs. H I don't go near. But a little cocaine, well, let's just say I've never felt a need to just say no. And that too can turn into a hell of a lifestyle. Knocking off drug dealers and mules, holding up in some cheap-ass motel on the edge of town, getting fucked up proper for weeks at a time. It brings with it a special kind of paranoia, ripping off dangerous guys who themselves have dangerous contacts all over the city. And the drugs don't exactly help with the paranoia, unless you mean the way gasoline helps a house fire. That special kind of paranoia, that had us hiding out on a level we hadn't gone to before. The night previous, we'd clipped the ear off a young man using a .22 bullet as our shears. We thought that was pretty funny, until we found out that the young man was the little brother of some big shot biker who ran with a whole gang of violent assholes. Apparently now they were tearing up the city proper, looking at all the usual hidey holes where guys like us might be found. And it sounded like they were twisting off a few ears of their own in the process. Word had gotten back to me that an acquaintance of mine got his arm busted and his head beat in when he couldn't give those assholes any leads on where me and Trevor might be. So we wound up squatting in this big old warehouse down by the waterfront. The place felt ancient. I don't think it had been used in years. The roof was half peeling off and half caved in. There was nothing to steal, and everything was either wet or made out of jagged metal, so even the junkies stayed clear of it. I didn't want to be there. Between the wind and the rain and the rubble, the place felt pretty unwelcoming. Almost kind of haunted, you know? But Trevor figured the place had to have a basement, which could work as some place to hide out for a day or so while the heat on us died down a little. Then we could make plans to leave town or whatever. And sure, we found stairs leading down under the warehouse. But what we found down below. The basement itself was just some unused storage space. A couple of empty filing cabinets and some metal racks leaning against a wall. But at the back, there was this big heavy door, like made out of metal, iron and steel, I think. We shouldn't have been able to budge it, but there was foundation damage all throughout the building, which must have weakened the door jambs or something, because all we had to do was both pull a little and the thing popped right open. The door opened onto some more stairs, going down. Those stairs led down to a hall. That hall led to another door, which again popped right open for us. If it had been locked, that might have been the end of the story for us. We really didn't want to keep going. But it wasn't locked, so we kept going. The next room seemed different, like some kind of laboratory. It felt like a place where science was done, medical experiments or that sort of thing. There wasn't any equipment left in the room, but you could see where stuff had been hooked up. There were still a couple old metal gurneys and even a small pile of a dozen or so dented bedpans. Looking around the place, it became obvious to me pretty quickly that they'd been doing something to kids down there. Trevor wasn't sure about that, but I was. The gurneys were all child-sized, and there were a couple of washrooms, a regular one and one that was like in an elementary school, with little toilets and sinks a good foot or two closer to the floor. I also found a couple of broken toys in a cardboard box, one of those wires on blocks that a kid can move colored beads up and down, and an action figure with the head ripped off, Some kind of soldier guy, I think. There were also a couple of desks in the back, adult-sized desks. We went through those, drawer by drawer, looking to see if there was anything we could use or steal. Even a half bottle of aspirin would have been nice. But the desks were mostly clean aside from dust. I say mostly clean because in the very last drawer I found a box. A little cardboard box with a lid, like a short shoebox. Inside the box were photos, a few old ones in black and white and newer ones in color, but still grainy, pre-digital. They were photos of kids, and people were doing stuff to them. Genetic stuff. Splicing, that might be the word for it. Combining their bodies with other things. The first image was of a little boy, maybe 6 years old, with antlers. A pair of antlers, each about 2 feet long, growing out the sides of his head. That wasn't too bad, really, but the next one. The girl couldn't have been more than 10, but she had these things. I thought they were pustules, like big sores, but if you look closer, you could see what they really were. How they had little openings, slits across their surfaces. The sores were mouths. She had mouths, some large, some small, growing out the sides of her face. She looked terrified. One was so big you could see weird little stunted teeth emerging from the gums. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but really it was just the top of the stack. A few of the kids had plants growing out of them, or they were growing into plants. The fingers on a hand warping into the shape of tree limbs. A colony of mushrooms sprouting out from an ear canal. Tree roots mingled in with the veins in a kid's leg, under the skin. It looked impossible. It should have been impossible. It was an affront to God. That's what Trevor said. I never knew him to be a religious type, but something about that place and those photos seemed to bring it out of him. He started muttering stuff about what Jesus gave his life for. He was talking about Jesus like he knew the man. I'd never once heard him speak about any of that any time before, but this place was different. I suspect he would have taken the photos from me and probably burned them, but I was in my own state of mind by then. Normally I was the guy who could just let shit go, move on, forget about it. But not this time. Not now. Those photos were mine, and I needed to learn every single goddamn thing I could about them. Some kind of government project, that's what we had to figure it was. There were government logos stamped onto some of the photos that made me think of the military and like top secret projects. In a back closet sort of space, Trevor found a big box full of chains with bits on them meant for holding wrists and ankles. I let him have it without any argument, as he felt he'd be able to sell them for a bit of scratch, and I was happy to let him feel like he was getting something out of all this, since he wasn't going to be getting those photos I found. Another picture showed a kid with what had to be bones growing out of him, but they didn't look like bones. The way his spine arced and the way his ribs spread out, it was like his body was trying to transform into a tiny cathedral, some old Catholic thing. In the frozen moment of the photograph, the boy was screaming an endless howl of pain and frustration. Why would somebody do this to him? His eyes seemed to ask. What purpose could any of it serve? There was another locked door at the back of the room. Trevor would have left it alone, but I bashed it open with one of the desk drawers, just smashed away at the door's handle until the whole piece came loose. That door opened onto a long, narrow hallway which looked to go on for a few 100 feet at least, and slightly at a downward angle, taking us deeper into the earth. We were using flashlights for all this, creeping around the place like a couple of cat burglars who couldn't find anything to steal. I'd convinced Trevor that there had to be some scientific equipment that got left behind, something we could sell for some real money. I didn't really believe that, but I didn't want to be alone down there. Maybe that's childish to you, I don't know. But I didn't want to be alone down there. There was this smell, like old meat and that mold that gets into drywall after a leak in a basement. Bad smell. But we pressed on. For as long as I'd known him previously, Trevor had always been the one in charge, the instigator. But in this new setting, in the dark underground, he seemed to be regressing, becoming more childlike himself. There was a point where I actually had to threaten him with physical violence to keep him moving. If I'd done that, spoke that way to Trevor up on the street under normal circumstances, he'd have beat the living hell out of me. I'd seen him break a man's fingers for less. But now he was shivering, looking around with his eyes practically bulging out of the sockets. I considered sending him back just for his sake, but then thought better of it. I didn't want to be alone down there. We kept finding more doorways and more hallways we could have gone down. A whole ant hive's worth of them twisting and intersecting, branching apart and reconnecting. I don't know how we didn't get lost, but it helped that the floors were so dusty that we left visible footprints. I don't know what I was looking for, what I expected to find. I had to stop to look at the photos every so often, trying to contemplate what this place would have looked like back when it was full and functional. There was an infant who had grown 3 extra eyeballs, one in each nostril and the third one filling up its mouth. They'd had to perform some sort of tracheotomy just to keep it alive. But it was clear that for whatever semblance of sentient consciousness it had, that baby just wanted to die. What was it all for? How had they done it? My mind kept thinking of Stephen King novels and those comic books where the government teams up with aliens to enslave all of humanity. Did people do this to people? Did something else do it? Honestly, which was the worse answer? Sick fuck humans or sick fuck monsters from another world? But the last room had all I needed to see. It didn't explain anything, but it was all I needed to see. We got that last door open and put our lights in the room, illuminating a few strange shapes, casting irregular shadows. Trevor made this little whining sound, and then there was this real pungent odor, and I realized that he'd pissed his pants. Big guy like Trevor, he's not built for the kind of stuff we were facing down there. He's good with material issues. Hey, we gotta beat this guy's head in to make $60. Okay. This motherfucker has a bag of dope we can take off him. Fine. Trevor can handle that kind of thing. He's a material man, a physical man, a man of the earth. But this shit was something else. Me, I read some books. I seen YouTube videos on like string theory and shit. I know how the universe is really just a series of vibrating energies all bouncing off of each other, and that it could all disappear just as easily as it appeared. I know my place in the cosmic scale of significance, and I know it ain't shit. There's whales and cockroaches in this world that have just as much of a soul as I do. Maybe bacteria too. But on some level, I guess I still thought the math could add up. You could show me some signs and some things that had happened, and I could rationalize a reason for it. Or somebody could. A plus B equals C, right? But I couldn't make any sense of what we were finding down there. It was like finding a hole in everything. Another photo was of an older boy, still only 12, maybe 13 years old. He had normal arms and legs, but in between them, his torso was like a great long millipede, dotted with dozens of tiny appendages like little pinchers. In the photo, he's screaming and thrashing, and these men with black surgical masks are holding him down. Honestly, I hope they were about to kill him. I can't imagine a poor kid having to live like that for even a minute, let alone an hour or a day. or years. Some of those photos had the same kids in them, but older, so maybe some of them had been held down there for years. Growing up all crooked and strange, down there in the dark. In that last room was something I couldn't quite put into words. It made me think of an exoskeleton, of something that molts or sheds its skin. But this looked like it had once been something like a man, before it took its skin off, before it grew into something else. There were still bits of bone and muscle in the carapace. Can you call it a carapace if it came from a person? I don't know. I really don't know. I might have heard something moving. Something at the far back of the room where the beam of my flashlight was too dim to break the darkness. I might have gotten an impression of something back there. Something large like a man, but scuttling like a bug. For a second, I can try to imagine something like a 200-pound spider. Has anything like that ever existed on Earth in all of history? I hope not. I truly do hope not. Just the thought of it, the idea that it was in there, was enough to make me... Well, it made me do maybe the worst thing I've ever done in my life. But so be it. I know who I am. I made my choice. I could have sworn I heard that scuttling sound coming towards us. And so I pulled out my piece, my little .38 special, and I shot Trevor in the back of his right knee. He screamed, fell to the floor and screamed, in pain mostly, but I think in terror too. My head was still ringing from the shot. Only an idiot fires a gun in a basement hallway without proper ear protection. But I'd done what I felt I had to do at that moment. It was smarter not to kill Trevor. I'd decided in less time than it took to do it, because if he was dead, the thing might just move right past him and on to me. That's why I didn't shoot him in the back of the head. But shooting him in the leg left him on the ground, thrashing, bleeding, screaming and crying. He knew. He looked at me and oh, he knew. And he wasn't even mad. Wasn't mad or disappointed or anything like that. You could see it in his eyes. He just didn't want to die that way. Alone. In the dark. But I wasn't going to stay down there with him. I took off running back the way we'd come. I looked for footprints and anything else that gave an indication to the path we'd traveled. Eventually, I found my way back to that first set of stairs we'd gone down, and from there it was just a quick run back to street level. Echoes of Trevor's screams followed me the whole way until I was out of the warehouse itself. I figure whatever happened to him, he didn't die quick. But once I was back up top, back in the real world, I stopped being able to hear him. The basement was too muffled, the tunnels too far underground. Once you weren't down there, you might as well have been standing on a whole different planet, a whole world away. Within a few minutes, I was already starting to doubt myself, what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd done. But the gun was still warm from having fired a shot, and Trevor's blood was still on my pants and my shirt. So whatever I remember or whatever I don't remember rightly, I know something happened down there. Something real. I've had a bit of time since then to get high and consider my options. I figure it's probably time for me to get out of this city. Find some quiet little sleepy town somewhere where nobody knows me. Maybe try out straight living. Clean up. Get a normal person job. Fuck, maybe that's thinking too far ahead. All I know right now is it's time for me to move on. I need to get the hell out of this city.